Richard Harrington's driver navigated the sleek black Bentley through the tree-lined streets of Westchester County. Rain tapped gently against the windows as they approached the wrought-iron gates of his estate. The afternoon meeting with the board had dragged on longer than expected, and all Richard wanted now was a glass of scotch and the silence of his study. As the car slowed near the entrance, something caught his eye. A small figure huddled against the stone pillar beside the gate. Not unusual, he thought. The area had seen an uptick in homeless people lately, despite the neighborhood association's efforts. "Sir," his driver, Marcus, looked at him through the rearview mirror. "Should I call security?" Richard squinted through the rain-streaked window. The figure was a girl, perhaps 12 or 13, wearing a navy jacket too thin for the November chill. She wasn't begging or holding a sign. She just stood there, staring at the house with an unsettling intensity. "Drive in," Richard said, already reaching for his phone to call his head of security. Another charity case would be directed to the foundation offices downtown, not his private residence. The gates swung open with a mechanical hum. As the car passed through, the girl's head snapped toward them, and for a brief moment, their eyes met. Something about her gaze made Richard pause. He pressed the intercom. "Wait, Marcus!" "Stop the car." The Bentley halted halfway up the drive. Richard stepped out, the cold rain immediately seeping into his Italian wool suit. He walked back toward the gate, where the girl now pressed her face between the bars. "Can I help you?" he called, keeping a cautious distance. The girl looked up, her face thin and pale. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her hair hung in damp strands around her face. Despite her disheveled appearance, there was something familiar in her features that Richard couldn't place. "Uncle," she said, her voice barely audible over the rain. "I am your daughter." Richard froze, the absurdity of the statement washing over him. He almost laughed. "I think you're confused. I don't have any children, and I'm not anyone's uncle." The girl reached into her jacket and pulled out something that dangled from a thin chain. "My mom said to find you. She said you'd help me." Richard stepped closer, drawn by curiosity more than concern. As he approached, the object came into focus. A silver locket, tarnished by time but unmistakable in its design. A small oval with a delicate pattern of roses etched into the metal. His throat tightened. He knew that locket. He had purchased it 20 years ago from an antique shop in Boston. A gift for his pregnant sister before their final argument, before she walked out of his life forever. "Where did you get that?" he demanded, his voice sharper than intended. "My mom gave it to me before she died. She said it was from you." Richard's mind raced. His sister, Elaine, pregnant and furious, shouting that she didn't need his charity or his judgment. He had tried to convince her to leave her boyfriend, a struggling musician with a heroin habit. She had refused. The locket had been a peace offering, alongside the check she had torn up and thrown in his face. "Your mother," he said slowly. "What was her name?" "Elaine Harrington." The girl's voice cracked. "She died 2 months ago." The rain seemed to fade into the background as a roaring filled Richard's ears. Elaine, dead. And this child, not his daughter as she'd first claimed, but his niece, standing at his gate like a ghost from the past. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice surprisingly steady despite the tremor in his hands. "Clara." She clutched the locket tighter. "Clara Matthews." Matthews? The boyfriend's surname. So Elaine had stayed with him after all. "Where is your father?" Clara's eyes dropped to the wet pavement. "He left when I was 4. Mom said he wasn't ready to be a dad." Of course he wasn't, Richard thought bitterly. He'd tried to warn Elaine. "How did you find me?" he asked. "Mom kept a box with newspaper clippings about you. About your company. Before she died, she told me your address." Clara's shoulders hunched against the cold. "She said you were the only family we had left." Richard stared at the child, at Elaine's daughter, trying to reconcile her existence with the carefully ordered world he'd built since his sister's departure. He had convinced himself that Elaine was fine, that she had chosen her path, that his responsibility had ended when she rejected his help. But the evidence of his failure stood before him, hungry, cold, and alone. He could turn her away, call social services, make a generous donation to whatever foster home they placed her in. It would be sensible, clean, and legally responsible. Instead, he found himself saying, "Come inside, Clara. Let's get you warm." He opened the gate and extended his hand. Clara hesitated, suddenly wary now that her mission to find him had succeeded. "I won't hurt you," Richard said gently. We'll figure this out. Clara stepped forward, not taking his hand, but following him to the waiting car. Marcus raised an eyebrow, but said nothing as Richard ushered the girl into the back seat. As they drove the short distance to the house, Richard noticed the way Clara's eyes widened at the sight of the sprawling mansion with its manicured lawns and stone facade. To her, this must seem like a palace from another world. Did my mom grow up here? She asked. Richard shook his head. No, we grew up in an apartment in Queens. This came much later. The car stopped at the front entrance, where Mrs. Winters, his housekeeper, waited under the portico with a concerned expression. Richard helped Clara out of the car. Mrs. Winters, this is Clara. She'll be staying with us tonight. Please prepare the blue guest room and find her some dry clothes. Mrs. Winters' professional demeanor didn't falter, despite the obvious questions in her eyes. Of course, Mr. Harrington. Dinner will be ready in an hour. As they entered the marble foyer, Clara stopped and stared up at the crystal chandelier, at the sweeping staircase, at the paintings that lined the walls. You live here all alone? She asked. Richard felt a strange twinge of embarrassment. Yes, just me and the staff. It's quiet, Clara observed. It had never seemed quiet to Richard before, but suddenly, through her eyes, he saw the emptiness of his grand rooms, the echo of his solitary footsteps. Come, he said, leading her toward the kitchen. Let's get you something to eat first. Then we'll talk about your mother. Mrs. Winters placed a bowl of chicken soup in front of Clara, along with a grilled cheese sandwich cut diagonally. The kitchen, normally a place of precise efficiency where Richard rarely ventured, suddenly felt more alive with the child's presence. Clara ate cautiously at first, then with growing hunger. Richard sat across from her at the breakfast nook, nursing a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. He watched as she finished the sandwich and soup, then accepted a glass of milk and chocolate chip cookies that Mrs. Winters produced, as if she'd been expecting a child visitor all along. When was the last time you had a proper meal? Richard asked. Clara shrugged, dunking a cookie into her milk. The shelter serves dinner at 6, but I left yesterday morning to find you. You've been looking for me since yesterday? Richard felt a twist of guilt. Where did you sleep? At the bus station. She said it matter-of-factly, as though spending the night alone in a bus station at 12 years old was perfectly normal. Richard cleared his throat. Clara, I need to understand what happened. To your mother, to Elaine. We haven't spoken in a very long time. Clara's eyes flickered to Mrs. Winters, who was discreetly wiping down counters within earshot. Mrs. Winters, that will be all for now. Thank you, Richard said. Once they were alone, Clara seemed to deflate slightly, her shoulders sagging under the weight of memories. Mom got sick last year. Cancer. She tried to work for a while, but then she couldn't anymore. Clara traced patterns in the condensation on her milk glass. We lost our apartment because she couldn't pay rent. We stayed with her friend Donna for a while, but Donna's boyfriend didn't want us there. Richard's jaw tightened. Why didn't she call me? Clara looked at him with eyes too old for her face. She said you wouldn't want to hear from her, that you had made that clear. A memory surfaced, Richard standing in his first office, phone in hand, telling his assistant to stop putting Elaine's calls through. She had called 3 times that week, each time asking for money. He had just secured his first major client, was finally making a name for himself. He couldn't keep bailing her out of whatever mess she and her boyfriend had created. After you tell someone to stop calling enough times, they eventually listen, Clara added, and Richard flinched at the simple truth of it. What happened next? We stayed at shelters most of the time. Mom kept trying to find work, but she was getting sicker. Clara's voice remained steady, but her hands trembled slightly. Then she got really bad, and they took her to the hospital. She was there for 3 weeks before. Clara's composure cracked, just for a moment. She took a deep breath and continued. Before she died, she gave me the locket. She said it was from you, that you gave it to her when she was pregnant with me. She said you were the only person who might help me. Richard pushed back from the table and walked to the window, needing a moment to collect himself. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the sky remained gray and heavy. He thought of Elaine dying in a hospital bed, alone except for this child. Had she thought of him in those final moments? Had she forgiven him for giving up on her? I have her ashes, Clara said quietly. In my backpack. The hospital gave them to me, but I didn't know what to do with them. Richard turned back, stunned. They released her ashes to you? A child? Where were the social workers? There was one. She wanted to put me in foster care right away, but I told her my uncle was coming to get me. I gave her your name. Clara's eyes met his, challenging. I ran away before she could check if it was true. The weight of the situation pressed down on Richard. This child had been essentially homeless for months, had watched her mother die, had carried her mother's ashes across the city to find an uncle she'd never met, on nothing more than a desperate hope. What about other family? Your father's side. Dad's parents died before I was born. He has a brother somewhere, but Mom said he was bad news. Clara hesitated. There's just you. Just him. The last branch of a family tree that had withered down to nearly nothing. I need to make some calls, Richard said finally, to verify everything and figure out our next steps. He saw fear flash across Clara's face. You can stay here tonight, of course. Mrs. Winters will show you to your room. You look like you could use a hot shower and some rest. Clara nodded but didn't move. Are you going to send me away? The directness of the question caught Richard off guard. I don't know yet, he answered honestly. This is unexpected. I need time to think. Mom said you were important now, that you had money and power. Clara's voice had taken on an edge. She said you'd always been smart, even when you were poor. Richard felt a strange flicker of warmth at the thought that Elaine had spoken of him to her daughter, had preserved some memory of their childhood together. Your mother was smart too, he said. Smarter than me in some ways. She wasn't smart about men, Clara said with unexpected bitterness. She always picked the wrong ones. That's what she told me before she died. Don't be like me, baby. Don't let a man ruin your life. The words hung in the air between them, a painful testament to Elaine's regrets. Richard sighed. Let's get you settled. We can talk more tomorrow when we're both rested. He called for Mrs. Winters, who appeared so quickly that Richard suspected she hadn't gone far. He instructed her to take Clara upstairs and provide whatever she needed. As they left the kitchen, Richard added, And Clara? I'm sorry about your mother. Truly. Clara nodded once, her expression unreadable, before following Mrs. Winters upstairs. Once alone, Richard went straight to his study and poured himself the scotch he'd been craving since the board meeting. He sank into his leather chair and opened his laptop. First, he researched what happened when a minor's sole guardian died. The legal complexities were daunting: court appointments, foster care systems, kinship care options. He typed Elaine Harrington Matthews' death into the search bar. Nothing relevant appeared. He tried variations until finally, buried in the public notices of a local paper, he found it. Elaine Matthews, 35, passed on September 24th at County General Hospital after a brief illness. She is survived by her daughter. Brief illness. A sterile euphemism for what had likely been a painful end. Richard reached for the phone and called Samuel Pierce, his personal attorney. Despite the late hour, Samuel answered on the second ring. I need a favor, Sam. Something discreet. Richard spoke in measured tones. I need you to verify the death of my sister, Elaine Matthews, née Harrington, approximately 2 months ago. And I need information about her daughter, Clara Matthews, age 12. School records, birth certificate, the works. Anything particular you're looking for? Samuel asked, professional as always. Richard hesitated. I need to know if I'm her closest living relative, and if there are any complications I should be aware of. Consider it done. I'll have something for you by morning. After hanging up, Richard removed a key from his desk drawer and unlocked the bottom drawer. Inside was a box he rarely opened. He lifted the lid to reveal old photographs, letters, and mementos from a past he had methodically packed away. He sifted through until he found what he was looking for, a photograph of himself and Elaine, taken over 15 years ago at his college graduation. She was pregnant then, her hand resting protectively over her belly, her smile bright and hopeful despite the circumstances. His arm was around her shoulders, his expression more serious but undeniably proud. It was the last time they had been truly happy in each other's company. Richard studied his sister's face, searching for resemblances to the girl sleeping upstairs. They had the same eyes, he realized, the same determined set to their jaw. He slipped the photo into his pocket and closed the box, his mind racing with possibilities and fears. He had spent the last 15 years building his empire, focused only on moving forward, never looking back. Now the past had appeared at his doorstep in the form of a child who needed him. For the first time in years, Richard Harrington had no idea what to do next. Sleep eluded Richard. He sat in his study until well past midnight, the fire burning low in the grate, his mind replaying the day's events in an endless loop. The scotch had done nothing to quiet his thoughts. Eventually, he found himself wandering the halls of his mansion, feeling strangely like a visitor in his own home. Without conscious intent, his feet carried him to the blue guest room where Clara slept. The door was slightly ajar, and he could hear the soft, even breathing of a child in deep slumber. He peered in, careful not to make a sound. Clara lay curled beneath the plush duvet, her face relaxed in sleep in a way it hadn't been while awake. Mrs. Winters had found her something to wear, a soft t-shirt that hung past her knees, likely borrowed from the laundry staff. Clara's own clothes had been discreetly removed, probably to be washed or possibly disposed of. On the bedside table sat a shabby backpack, held together in places with safety pins and electrical tape. Beside it was the silver locket. Richard hesitated, then slipped quietly into the room. He picked up the locket, careful not to disturb the chain. The clasp was broken, he noticed, held together with a bent paperclip. With gentle pressure, he opened it. Inside was a tiny photograph, faded and creased. Richard recognized it immediately, a younger version of himself and Elaine at Coney Island. Their faces pressed together to fit in the frame, the Ferris wheel visible behind them. He had forgotten this photo even existed. How had Elaine preserved it all these years? He closed the locket and set it down, feeling like an intruder. As he turned to leave, his foot nudged something under the bed. Crouching down, he discovered a battered shoebox. Clara's treasures, no doubt. He should leave it alone. Instead, he found himself lifting the lid. Inside were the pitiful archives of a child's life. A few photographs, school certificates, colorful rocks, a pressed flower, birthday cards. Richard sifted through them carefully, constructing a fragmented narrative of the niece he'd never known. A spelling bee award. A drawing of what appeared to be Elaine and Clara in front of a small apartment building. A report card with mostly BS and the teacher's comment. Clara is bright, but needs to participate more in class. At the bottom of the box, he found a small plastic bag containing what could only be Elaine's ashes. The official label from the crematorium was attached with a rubber band. The stark information, a final reduction of his sister's life. Name, dates, file number. Richard carefully replaced everything and slid the box back under the bed, a hollow feeling expanding in his chest. Back in the hallway, he leaned against the wall, overcome by a wave of grief so intense it nearly brought him to his knees. He had spent years deliberately not thinking about Elaine, convincing himself she was fine, that she had chosen her path. When was the last time he had even tried to find her? Had she tried to contact him during her illness? Had she been waiting for him to reach out first? Richard made his way downstairs and out onto the terrace, needing the cold night air to clear his head. The immaculate gardens stretched before him, illuminated by carefully placed landscape lighting. Beautiful, precise, and utterly lifeless. Like so much of what he had built. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from Samuel. Initial information verified. E. Matthews died of advanced ovarian cancer on date stated. C. Matthews' birth certificate lists E. Harrington as mother, father listed as David Matthews. No current location for father. Child has no other immediate family. Call me in the morning for full details. Richard put the phone away, unsurprised. Clara had told him the truth. Not that he had doubted her. There had been something in her direct gaze that spoke of a child who had learned that honesty was sometimes the only currency she possessed. By morning, Richard had made a decision of sorts. Not a permanent solution, but a starting point. He showered and dressed, choosing casual clothes instead of his usual suit, jeans and a sweater that he couldn't remember purchasing but found in the back of his closet. When he came downstairs, Clara was already in the kitchen, sitting at the counter while Mrs. Winters prepared breakfast. She wore her own clothes again, now clean and pressed, though Richard could see they were worn thin at the elbows and knees. "Good morning," he said, feeling strangely nervous. Clara looked up from the glass of orange juice she had been staring into. "Morning," she replied cautiously. "Did you sleep well?" She nodded. "That bed is really soft." Mrs. Winters placed a plate of scrambled eggs and toast in front of Clara, then turned to Richard. "The usual, sir?" "Just coffee, thank you." He sat beside Clara, maintaining a respectful distance. "Clara, I've been thinking about your situation." She stiffened, her fork pausing halfway to her mouth. I verified what you told me about your mother, Richard continued, trying to sound gentle but practical. I'm sorry for your loss. Truly. Thanks, Clara mumbled, setting down her fork. I'd like to help you, Richard said, choosing his words carefully. But I need to be honest. I don't know how to be anyone's guardian. I work long hours. I travel frequently. My life isn't set up for a child. Clara's face remained impressively neutral, but he saw her knuckles whiten as she gripped the edge of the counter. There are excellent boarding schools, Richard continued. Places where you'd get a top-notch education, make friends your own age, have stability and structure. You want to send me away? It wasn't a question. I want what's best for you, Richard corrected. And I'm not sure that's living here with me. Clara pushed her plate away, no longer pretending to have an appetite. Mom said you were my only family, but that doesn't mean you have to want me. The simple honesty of her statement made Richard wince. It's not about wanting or not wanting you, Clara. It's about what's best for your future. She looked around the kitchen, at the gleaming appliances and marble countertops. This place has like 20 rooms. You could probably fit my whole old apartment building in here. But there's no room for me. Richard sighed. It's not about physical space. It's about emotional space. Capacity. I don't know how to be a parent. I'm not asking you to be my parent, Clara said, her voice steady despite the hurt evident in her eyes. I just need somewhere to live until I'm old enough to take care of myself. Richard felt a stab of shame. This child wasn't asking for affection or guidance, just basic shelter. How low had her expectations fallen? What I'm proposing, he said more gently, is that I become your legal guardian. You would attend Westbrook Academy, one of the finest preparatory schools in the country. You'd live in their dormitories during the school year, and during holidays and summers, you'd stay here. I would ensure all your needs are met: education, healthcare, clothes, everything. Clara considered this, her expression guarded. Would I see you sometimes? The question caught Richard off guard. Yes, of course. I could visit on parents' weekends, and you'd be here for holidays. And I'd have my own room here? For when I visit. Absolutely. Richard nodded, warming to his plan now that Clara didn't seem outright opposed. We could decorate it however you like. Clara was silent for a long moment, studying her untouched eggs. What about Mom? She finally asked. What about her? Her ashes. Clara met his eyes. I don't know what to do with them. She never said what she wanted. Richard hadn't considered this. We could find a place for her. A proper resting place. There's a cemetery where our parents are buried. Would you like that? Clara nodded slowly. I think she'd like to be near her parents. Then we'll arrange it, Richard promised. Together. A tentative understanding reached. Clara returned to her breakfast, and Richard sipped his coffee. The silence between them was no longer quite so tense, but it was far from comfortable. Clara, Richard said after a while, tell me about your mother. What was she like these past years? The question seemed to surprise her. She was nice. She sang a lot, even when things were bad. She worked at a diner for a long time, then at a clothing store. She tried really hard. Clara pushed her eggs around on her plate. She kept all those newspaper articles about you. She was proud of you, I think, even though she was mad at you too. Richard felt a lump forming in his throat. I was proud of her once too. She was always braver than me. She said you were the smart one, and she was the stubborn one. Richard smiled despite himself. That's probably accurate. She said I'm stubborn like her. I can see that, Richard said, noticing for the first time the way Clara's jaw set in a line so reminiscent of Elaine's that it made his chest ache. Over the next week, Richard made arrangements. He used his connections to secure Clara a place at Westbrook Academy, despite the semester having already begun. He hired a personal shopper to outfit her with everything she might need: clothes, shoes, a laptop, toiletries, books. He contacted the family lawyer to begin guardianship proceedings. And through it all, he maintained a careful distance from Clara, treating her with polite concern but avoiding any deeper connection. She became a project to be managed, a problem to be solved with his considerable resources. He told himself this was kindness, that he was giving her a better life than Elaine had been able to provide. But sometimes, late at night, when he passed her door and heard the muffled sounds of crying, he wondered if his solution was addressing the wound he could see rather than the one he couldn't. Westbrook Academy sat on 50 acres of pristine grounds in Connecticut, its brick buildings and ivy-covered walls projecting exactly the image of prestigious education that Richard had been seeking. The headmistress, Dr. Eleanor Winters, greeted them in her office with practiced warmth, her handshake firm and her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "We're delighted to welcome Clara to our community," she said, gesturing for them to sit in the leather chairs facing her desk. "Though midterm admissions are unusual, we understand there are sometimes extenuating circumstances." Clara sat stiffly in her new uniform, navy blazer, plaid skirt, knee socks, and polished loafers, looking like a child playing dress-up. She hadn't spoken during the hour-long drive from Richard's estate, instead staring out the window as suburban landscapes gave way to rolling countryside. Clara's academic records are impressive, considering the instability of her previous situation, Dr. Winters continued, reviewing a file on her desk. "We'll arrange for placement testing tomorrow to determine if any remedial work is needed, but I suspect she'll catch up quickly." Richard nodded, relieved. "That's good to hear. We assign all new students a peer mentor to help with the transition. Sarah Brinkley will show Clara around today and introduce her to the other girls in Thornfield House." Dr. Winters pressed an intercom button and requested Sarah be sent in. While they waited, Dr. Winters outlined the school's rigorous schedule: morning classes, afternoon activities, evening study hall, and strictly enforced lights-out times. Richard found himself nodding along, grateful for the structure that would fill Clara's days. A knock at the door heralded the arrival of a cheerful-looking girl with auburn hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. Sarah Brinkley introduced herself with the confidence of someone who had never questioned her place in the world, and Clara offered a tentative smile in return. "Perhaps you'd like to show Clara to her dormitory now," Dr. Winters suggested. "Mr. Harrington and I have a few more matters to discuss." Clara glanced at Richard, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. He gave her what he hoped was an encouraging nod. "I'll come find you before I leave." After the girls departed, Dr. Winters' demeanor shifted subtly. "Mr. Harrington, I understand Clara's situation is unconventional. Her mother, my sister, recently passed away," Richard explained, keeping the details minimal. "I've initiated guardianship proceedings." "Yes, I see that in her file. While we respect family privacy, it's important for us to understand any trauma or issues that might affect a student's adjustment." Her pen hovered over a notepad. "How is Clara coping with her loss?" Richard realized he didn't know the answer. Clara rarely spoke about Elaine, and he rarely asked. "She's resilient," he offered finally. "But she's been through a lot. The transition to boarding school can be difficult even for children from stable backgrounds," Dr. Winters said carefully. "Our school counselor, Dr. Reed, will check in with Clara regularly. I suggest you maintain consistent contact as well, weekly phone calls, perhaps visits when your schedule permits." "Of course," Richard agreed, though the thought of regular phone conversations with Clara filled him with a strange anxiety. What would they talk about? "I travel frequently for business, but I'll make arrangements." After signing various forms and writing a substantial check, Richard was escorted to Thornfield House, a 3-story brick building with white columns and a sweeping front lawn. Inside, he found Clara sitting on a twin bed in a room she would share with another girl. Her new belongings had been delivered earlier and now sat in labeled boxes along one wall. "What do you think?" he asked, standing awkwardly in the doorway. Clara shrugged. "It's okay. Sarah seems nice." "Yeah." Richard stepped into the room, noticing the bulletin board above the empty desk that would be Clara's. "You can put up pictures if you want. Make it feel more like home." Clara didn't respond, instead picking at a loose thread on her blazer. "Dr. Winters thinks you'll do well here," Richard tried again. "The academic program is excellent. This is an opportunity many children would envy." "I know," Clara said flatly. "You don't have to sell me on it anymore. I'm here." Richard sighed, unsure how to navigate her mood. "Is there anything else you need before I go?" Clara finally looked up at him, her expression unreadable. "When will I see you again?" "Soon," Richard promised vaguely. "I'll call next weekend to see how you're settling in." She nodded, accepting his answer without comment. As he turned to leave, she spoke again, her voice smaller. "What about Thanksgiving?" Richard paused. He had planned to spend Thanksgiving as he usually did, working through the holiday at his Manhattan apartment to avoid the empty echo of his house. "That's still a few weeks away. We'll figure something out." Clara's face closed off completely then, and she returned to picking at her blazer. Richard recognized dismissal when he saw it. He said an awkward goodbye, promised again to call soon, and left, feeling simultaneously relieved and guilty. The first few weeks passed in a blur of business meetings, overseas calls, and late nights at the office. Richard called Clara as promised, but their conversations were stilted and brief. Yes, classes were fine. Yes, the food was okay. No, she didn't need anything. When Dr. Reed, the school counselor, called in early November, Richard was in Tokyo, negotiating a major acquisition. He stepped out of a meeting to take the call. "Mr. Harrington, I wanted to discuss some concerns about Clara," Dr. Reed began. "She's performing adequately in her classes, but her teachers report that she rarely participates and has made few social connections." Richard frowned. "She's always been quiet, from what I understand. And she's adjusting to a completely new environment." "Yes, but isolation can be both a symptom and a cause of deeper issues," Dr. Reed explained. "When I meet with Clara, she's polite but guarded. She won't discuss her mother or her feelings about her changed circumstances." "What do you suggest?" Richard asked, glancing at his watch. His team would be waiting. "More regular contact from you would be beneficial. Perhaps you could visit this weekend? We're having a fall festival that many parents attend." Richard mentally reviewed his schedule. Meetings tomorrow, a red-eye flight back to New York, then the Peterson presentation on Saturday. "I'm afraid this weekend is impossible," he said, "but I'll come as soon as I can." November slipped into December. Richard visited twice, bringing gifts and taking Clara to lunch in the nearby town. Their conversations remained superficial, focused on classes and activities rather than feelings or memories. Richard told himself this was progress. Clara was adjusting, learning, safe. What more could be expected? The call that changed everything came 3 days before Christmas. Richard was at his annual holiday party, surrounded by business associates and their spouses, when his phone buzzed with the school's number. "Mr. Harrington, this is Dr. Winters. There's been an incident involving Clara." Richard's stomach dropped. "Is she hurt?" "No, nothing like that. She attempted to leave campus without permission. One of our security guards found her walking along the highway with her backpack." "Walking where?" Richard asked, moving to a quieter corner of the room. "She said she was trying to reach the train station. When asked where she was going, she initially refused to answer, then claimed she was coming to see you." Richard closed his eyes, remembering their last conversation. He had explained that he would be spending Christmas in Aspen with business associates, but had arranged for Clara to stay with the family of her roommate in Boston. Clara had said she understood, that it sounded fun. He had believed her. "Is she in trouble?" he asked. "Ordinarily, an unauthorized departure would result in serious disciplinary action," Dr. Winters said. "However, given the holidays and Clara's situation, I think it would be best if you came to collect her early. She can begin her winter break now, and we'll address this when classes resume in January." Richard looked around at the glittering party, at the faces of people whose names he sometimes struggled to remember, then down at the glass of expensive scotch in his hand. "I'll be there first thing in the morning," he said. The drive to Westbrook the next day was silent save for the soft classical music playing through the car speakers. Clara sat beside him, staring out the window, just as she had on their first drive months ago. "You could have been hurt," Richard finally said as they approached his estate. "Walking along the highway alone. Do you understand how dangerous that was?" Clara said nothing. "If you wanted to see me, you could have called. I would have arranged something." "Would you?" Clara asked, her voice tired beyond her years. "You're always busy, always working, always somewhere else." Richard pulled into the driveway, the familiar gates swinging open automatically. "I'm doing the best I can, Clara. I never expected to be anyone's guardian. I'm trying to give you opportunities one never had." Clara unbuckled her seatbelt before the car had fully stopped. "I never asked for opportunities. I just needed someone who wanted me." She was out of the car and heading toward the house before Richard could respond, leaving him sitting there with her words echoing in his ears. The house had been decorated for Christmas in Richard's absence. A massive tree in the foyer, garlands along the banisters, wreaths on every door. Mrs. Winters oversaw the holiday transformations each year with military precision, hiring professionals to create a magazine-worthy display that Richard barely noticed. Now, watching Clara take in the decorations with no visible reaction, He realized how hollow it all was. Beauty without meaning, tradition without heart. "Are you hungry?" he asked as they entered the foyer. "Mrs. Winters can make us some lunch." Clara shook her head. "I just want to go to my room." "Clara, wait." Richard reached out, but stopped short of touching her. "We should talk about what happened." "There's nothing to talk about. I made a mistake. I won't do it again." Her voice was flat, resigned in a way that disturbed him more than anger would have. "That's not," Richard began. But Clara was already climbing the stairs, her small backpack, the same one she'd arrived with months ago, clutched in her hand. Richard stood in the foyer, surrounded by perfect decorations and utter silence, feeling more lost than he had in years. After a moment, he retreated to his study and poured himself a drink, though it was barely noon. He had canceled his Aspen trip in a flurry of apologetic emails, citing a family emergency, but had made no actual plans for the holidays. What did one do with a grieving 12-year-old for 2 weeks? The answer came from an unexpected source. Later that afternoon, as Richard sat at his desk pretending to work, Mrs. Winters knocked on his study door. "Sir, might I have a word?" Richard gestured for her to enter, noticing she carried a tray with tea and what appeared to be homemade cookies. "These are for Clara," she explained, setting the tray down. "I thought she might be hungry, but she won't open her door." Richard sighed. "She's upset. I'm not sure how to handle it." Mrs. Winters hesitated, then spoke with uncharacteristic directness. "If I may, sir, perhaps the young miss needs more than a room to visit occasionally." "What do you mean?" "Children need stability, sir. A sense of belonging." Mrs. Winters smoothed her already immaculate apron. "My brother raised his granddaughter after my niece passed. It wasn't easy, especially at his age, but he said what helped most was making her feel like his home was truly hers." Richard considered this. "Clara has her own room here." "A room is not a home, sir," Mrs. Winters said gently. "If I might suggest, the East Wing guest room is larger and gets the morning sun. It has the window seat she seems fond of sitting in when she visits. Perhaps if she helped decorate it to her liking, it might feel more permanent." Richard nodded slowly. "That's a good idea. I'll speak with her about it." "And if I might be so bold," Mrs. Winters continued, "the holidays are difficult after losing someone. My brother always said that keeping busy helped his granddaughter, baking cookies, decorating their own tree, small traditions they created together." After Mrs. Winters left, Richard sat for a long time, turning her words over in his mind. Clara didn't just need a roof and education. She needed roots, traditions, a sense that she mattered to someone. He had been treating her like a responsibility, a problem to solve, when what she needed was to be treated like family. That evening, Richard knocked on Clara's door, waiting patiently until she finally opened it. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her hair tangled. "I'd like to talk," he said. "Not about what happened at school, but about what happens next." Clara eyed him warily, but stepped back to let him enter. The guest room was impersonal despite her weeks of visits. No photographs, no personal touches. Even her clothes were still partially packed in the designer luggage he had purchased. Richard sat awkwardly on the edge of the bed while Clara took the desk chair, pulling her knees up to her chest. "I've been thinking," he began, "that maybe Westbrook isn't the right fit for you." Clara's head snapped up, alarm crossing her face. "Are you sending me somewhere else?" "No," Richard said quickly. "I'm suggesting you might not go back at all." "I don't understand." Richard took a deep breath. "I'm suggesting you live here, with me, full-time. Attend a local school. Make this your home, not just a place you visit on holidays." Clara stared at him, clearly trying to determine if this was some kind of trick. "Why?" "Because I've been doing this all wrong," Richard admitted. "I've been trying to give you the things I thought you needed, education, opportunities, structure. But I haven't been giving you what you actually need, stability, permanence, family." "You don't have to do this," Clara said, her voice small. "I know I'm not what you expected to have in your life." "No, you're not," Richard agreed. "But that doesn't mean you don't belong here." He gestured around the generic guest room. "This room isn't right, though." Mrs. Winters suggested the East Wing bedroom. "It's larger, with the window seat you like. We could decorate it however you want. Make it truly yours." Clara unfolded from the chair, hope and hesitation warring on her face. Really? And I was thinking," Richard hesitated, feeling oddly vulnerable. "I was thinking we could get a Christmas tree for the den. Not like that monster downstairs." A normal-sized one that we could decorate ourselves. If you want. Clara's eyes filled with tears, but for the first time, Richard thought they might not be entirely sad ones. My mom and I used to get a tiny tree for our apartment. We made ornaments from paper because the real ones were too expensive. We could make ornaments, Richard offered, surprising himself. I'm not particularly crafty, but I'm willing to learn. A ghost of a smile crossed Clara's face. You'd probably be really bad at it. Undoubtedly, Richard agreed, feeling something tight in his chest begin to loosen. But I'd try. The next day, they visited the East Wing bedroom together. It was indeed larger, with a bay window that overlooked the gardens and built-in bookshelves along one wall. Clara ran her hand over the window seat cushion, already imagining herself curled up there with a book. We can paint it any color you want, Richard offered. And get new furniture, curtains, whatever you like. Could we paint it blue? Like the sky, not like navy. Absolutely. They spent the morning online, looking at bedroom furniture, paint samples, and decor. Richard had never spent so much time considering the merits of different desk styles or bookshelf configurations. But Clara's growing enthusiasm made the tedium worthwhile. After lunch, they drove into town to find a Christmas tree. The lot was nearly empty this close to the holiday, most of the good trees long gone. What remained were Charlie Brown specimens with bare patches and crooked trunks. These are kind of sad, Richard observed, surveying their limited options. I like this one, Clara said, pointing to a scrappy fir with uneven branches but a determined look about it. It just needs a chance. Richard thought of the 12-foot noble fir in his foyer, perfectly shaped and professionally decorated, and then at the humble tree Clara had chosen. This one it is, he agreed. They stopped at a craft store on the way home, filling a cart with ornament-making supplies, glass balls, ribbon, glitter, paint, and enough glue to reconstruct the Tower of Babel. Richard couldn't remember the last time he had walked through a craft store, if ever. The chaos of colors and options was overwhelming, but Clara navigated the aisles with growing confidence, selecting items with careful consideration. That evening, they cleared the coffee table in the den, a room Richard rarely used despite its comfortable furniture and working fireplace, and spread out their supplies. Mrs. Winters provided hot chocolate and discreetly withdrew, leaving them to their creative endeavors. Richard discovered he was indeed terrible at crafting. His attempts at painted ornaments looked like they had been created by a particularly untalented kindergartner. Clara, on the other hand, revealed an artistic streak, creating delicate designs with patient precision. My mom was good at art, she explained, carefully painting a snowflake pattern. She used to draw pictures for me when I couldn't sleep. I didn't know that about her, Richard said, abandoning his own disaster of an ornament. She liked to draw when we were kids, too. I'd forgotten. What else was she like? When you were growing up? Richard leaned back, memories surfacing that he hadn't allowed himself to revisit in years. She was fearless. I was always the cautious one, but Elaine would climb the tallest trees, talk to strangers, stand up to bullies. Nothing scared her. She was scared at the end, Clara said quietly, not looking up from her painting. She tried to hide it, but I could tell. Richard's throat tightened. I wish I had been there. Me too. Clara set down her paintbrush. But you're here now. The simple statement hung in the air between them, an acknowledgement and a challenge. Richard nodded, not trusting himself to speak. They decorated their imperfect tree with their imperfect ornaments, and when they finished, Richard had to admit it possessed a charm that his professionally decorated showpiece downstairs could never match. Each crooked ornament represented a moment of connection, each uneven branch a testament to authenticity over appearance. That night, Richard canceled his remaining holiday business engagements. The next morning, he called Westbrook Academy and formally withdrew Clara from the school, arranging for her records to be transferred to Riverside Middle School, just 3 miles from his estate. Over the following days, they established a hesitant routine. They painted the East Wing bedroom a color that the paint chip called Cloudless Day. They assembled furniture from upscale boutiques that Clara had selected with careful consideration of each piece. Richard hung curtains, badly, and Clara arranged books on her new shelves, meticulously. January brought fresh snow and new beginnings. Clara started at Riverside Middle School after winter break, nervous but determined. Richard had attended the orientation with her, feeling oddly out of place among the other parents with their casual clothes and easy familiarity. He wore a sport coat instead of his usual suit, a concession to the setting that still left him overdressed. "Dad, you're staring," Clara whispered as they toured the science lab. Richard started at the word, "Dad." She had been using it inconsistently since Christmas, sometimes Richard, sometimes Uncle, and occasionally, hesitantly, Dad. Each time it caught him off guard, a reminder of the role he was still learning to inhabit. "Sorry," he murmured back. "Just thinking." The principal, Mrs. Garcia, had been welcoming, though Richard detected a hint of curiosity behind her professional demeanor. The sudden appearance of Richard Harrington, whose name graced the wing of the local hospital, with a previously unmentioned daughter, had undoubtedly sparked gossip. Richard found he didn't care. Let them talk. The first few weeks of their new arrangement required constant adjustment. Richard hired a driver to take Clara to and from school, as his unpredictable schedule made daily drop-offs impossible. He installed a home office to reduce his commute to Manhattan. He learned to check homework, sign permission slips, and navigate the Byzantine school messaging system that sent endless alerts about bake sales and early dismissals. Clara, for her part, approached her new school with cautious optimism. She was quiet but not withdrawn, making a few friends but bringing none home initially. She joined the art club on Tuesdays and developed a sudden interest in soccer, requiring weekend shopping trips for cleats and shin guards that Richard approached with the same thoroughness he would a corporate acquisition. By February, they had established tentative routines: breakfast together most mornings, dinner when Richard wasn't working late, weekend outings that expanded both their comfort zones. They visited museums where Clara lingered over paintings while Richard checked emails, bookstores where they each selected titles for the other to try, and once, memorably, an arcade where Richard discovered an unexpected talent for skee-ball that made Clara laugh until she hiccuped. Not everything was smooth. Richard struggled with the emotional aspects of parenting, often retreating to his study when conversations turned personal. Clara had nightmares she wouldn't discuss and moments of sadness that seemed to swallow her whole. They circled each other carefully, both afraid of rejection, both wanting connection they weren't sure how to build. The breakthrough came unexpectedly, on a rainy March evening. Richard had just returned from a business trip to Chicago to find Clara sitting at the kitchen counter, shoulders hunched as she stared at a school assignment. "Everything okay?" he asked, setting down his briefcase. Clara shrugged, pushing a packet toward him. "We have to make a family tree for social studies." Richard looked at the assignment sheet, immediately understanding the problem. The template featured spaces for mother, father, grandparents, siblings, aunts, uncles, cousins, an explosion of nuclear family normalcy that reflected nothing of Clara's reality. "I started with Mom's side," Clara said, pointing to her partial work. She had written Elaine Matthews in the mother space and placed Richard in the uncle position. The rest remained blank. Richard sat beside her, studying the paper. "You know," he said carefully, "family trees can take different shapes. Some are tall and narrow, some are wide and sprawling. Ours is basically a stick," Clara said, attempting humor though her eyes were damp. "Maybe the tree isn't the right metaphor for us." Richard pulled a blank sheet of paper from the stack. "What if we think of it as a forest instead? Different trees growing together?" Clara looked at him quizzically. "Here's what I mean." Richard rarely drew anything beyond financial charts, but he sketched a simple grove of trees. "This is your mother's tree, with her parents here at the roots." He labeled them Henry and Margaret Harrington, names Clara knew from stories. "This tree is mine, our shared roots. And this smaller tree here is you, growing between the two, connected to both." "What about my dad? My biological dad?" Clara asked, the question emerging so naturally that Richard knew she had been wondering about it for some time. Richard chose his words carefully. "We can add him if you want. I don't know much about him, but he's part of your story." Clara considered this, then shook her head. "Not yet. Maybe someday." She took the pencil and added details to Richard's crude sketch. Leaves on the trees, a sun above, even a small rabbit at the base. "Can I turn this in instead of the regular sheet?" "Of course. I'll write a note to your teacher explaining." Clara hesitated, then asked, "Will you tell me more about them?" "Mom's parents, my grandparents." That night, they sat in the den with old photo albums Richard had excavated from storage. Pictures of a younger Elaine and Richard with their parents, summer vacations at a modest lake cabin, school events, and holiday gatherings. The mundane visual history of a family that had fallen apart but once had been whole. Your grandfather was a construction foreman, Richard explained, pointing to a tall man with Clara's same serious eyes. He worked on half the buildings in Queens. Your grandmother was a nurse at the community hospital. She worked night shifts for years, so one of them could always be home with us. Clara traced her finger over their faces. Mom didn't talk about them much. She said it made her too sad. They would have adored you, Richard said with sudden certainty. You have your grandmother's artistic talent and your grandfather's determination. They stayed up late, Richard sharing stories he had kept locked away for years, some making Clara laugh, others bringing tears to both their eyes. For the first time, Richard allowed himself to fully remember Elaine as she had been before their estrangement, bright, funny, passionate, stubborn, and to see those qualities living on in her daughter. The next morning, Richard made a decision. He called his assistant and cleared his schedule for the following weekend. Pack a bag, he told Clara on Friday afternoon. Nothing fancy, just casual clothes for 2 days. Where are we going? Clara asked, intrigued by the mystery. You'll see. They drove north, leaving the manicured suburbs behind for the more rugged landscape of upstate New York. After 3 hours, Richard turned onto a narrow road that wound through dense forest before emerging at the shore of a small lake. A weathered cabin sat back from the water, its green paint faded and peeling. What is this place? Clara asked as they parked. This was our family cabin, Richard explained. My parents bought it when I was about 5. We spent every summer here until I was in high school. He hadn't visited in nearly 15 years. After his parents died, Richard and Elaine had inherited the property jointly. When they stopped speaking, Richard had simply continued paying the taxes and basic maintenance, unable to sell it but unwilling to use it. The cabin was musty but clean, thanks to the caretaker Richard paid to check on it quarterly. It was also frozen in time. The same worn furniture, the same faded curtains, the same collection of board games with missing pieces stacked on a shelf. Mom brought me here once, Clara said, surprising Richard. I was really little, maybe 4. I remember the lake and the ducks. She did. Richard tried to imagine Elaine returning here alone with her child. I didn't know. Clara nodded. She said it was where she was happiest as a kid. We only stayed one night. They spent the weekend reacquainting themselves with the cabin and its surroundings. They took the old rowboat out on the lake, though neither was particularly skilled at rowing. They attempted to fish with ancient gear found in the shed, catching nothing but enjoying the peaceful hours on the dock. They built a campfire and made s'mores that dripped marshmallow on their clothes. On Sunday morning, as they prepared to leave, Clara asked, "Can we come back in the summer, when it's warm enough to swim?" Richard looked around at the shabby cabin that had once been the center of his childhood summers. We could, or we could build something new here, something that's ours. Clara considered this. Could we keep some of the old parts, like the porch swing and the fireplace? Absolutely, Richard agreed. The best things to build are the ones with good foundations. By late spring, Clara had settled fully into her new life. Her room was finally complete, the walls adorned with her own artwork and photographs, some from Richard's albums, others new ones they had taken together. The silver locket, properly repaired, hung from a hook on her mirror rather than around her neck. Not forgotten, but no longer her only connection to the past. Richard had changed too. His colleagues remarked on his more reasonable working hours, his occasional references to school events and soccer games. His house transformed from a showplace to a home. Clara's textbooks scattered on the kitchen counter, her favorite cereals in the pantry, her shoes kicked off by the door. On a warm evening in May, they sat on the terrace watching the sunset. Clara was sketching, her talent blossoming under the guidance of her art teacher, while Richard reviewed contracts with half his attention, mostly content to enjoy the companionable silence. "I have something for you," Clara said suddenly, setting aside her sketchbook. She disappeared into the house, returning with a small gift bag. Richard opened it curiously, finding a framed drawing inside. It was the forest sketch he had created for her family tree assignment, but transformed by her artistic skill into something beautiful. The trees were detailed and lifelike, their roots visibly intertwined beneath the soil. At the bottom, in careful lettering, she had written, "Family, growing together." Your teacher liked the forest idea, Clara explained, watching his reaction. She gave me an A. Richard studied the drawing, touched beyond words. It's perfect, he said finally. Thank you. Clara smiled, then asked hesitantly, Can I ask you something important? Of course. The adoption papers you're filling out. Does that mean I'll be Clara Harrington officially? Richard blinked in surprise. He had been working with his attorneys on formal adoption proceedings, but hadn't discussed the name change aspect with Clara, not wanting to pressure her. Only if that's what you want, he said. You could keep Matthews or hyphenate, or I want to be a Harrington, Clara interrupted. Mom would understand. She kept her name even after she married, you know? She said being a Harrington mattered to her. Richard felt a lump form in his throat. It would mean a lot to me if you took our name, he admitted. But only if you're sure. I'm sure. Clara's voice held the same determination he had come to recognize as her birthright, his sister's steadfastness living on. We're a family now, right? Yes, Richard said, putting his arm around her shoulders as they watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues. We're a family. In the end, it wasn't the mansion or the money or the opportunities that had saved them both. It was the simple recognition that family wasn't something you possessed or lost, but something you built, with patience, with forgiveness, with love. Richard had lost his sister, but in her final act of trust, sending her daughter to find him, Elaine had given them both the chance to heal. The trees in their forest might bear the scars of storms weathered, but they were growing strong, their roots intertwined beneath the surface, their branches reaching toward the same sky.